When you are up there, above, 2,000 meters, it's massive. Oh, the mountains around you are so beautiful. If you've got good weather, the skies are blue that you cannot imagine. The rock is this broken, bright grey granite, and the gravel cycling is absolutely special. The mountain huts are good as well. Oh, it really caught my imagination.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Simon Willis. It's fair to say Simon has led a life full of adventure, exploring the great outdoors in a myriad of ways. From the early days of cycling the Camino Pilgrim route, hiking the full length of the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, to establishing the Scottish Sea Kayak Trail, Simon has an adventure CV that would rival most. Recently, Simon took on the Torino Nice Rally, a bikepacking route traversing a section of the Alps from Italy to France. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today, Simon. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bella. You see, I am just so old. I've had so much time to fit in all of these things in 64 years.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to unravelling and going down some of those rabbit warrens of adventure stories that will no likely come up for you, Simon. But as we are going to traverse back into the past, a way I like to open up my podcast with all of my guests is with the same question, and that is, can you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
But you see, we're prepared for this now because we've been listening to your previous podcasts. So I'm going to take Lizzie Jenkins' approach and say, yes, there is some early bikes that I've seen pictures of me riding when I was a toddler, and I'm sure I had something with training wheels on it. But the one that really sticks out to me, and I don't know if you had these in Australia, was the Rally Chopper. It came out about the same time as the Easy Rider and the Hells Angels things from the States. And this bike was the most impractical bike around. It had a tiny front wheel, a big back wheel, it had cow horn handlebars, it had a gear shift in the but not like on a down tube, just it was like a car gear stick, and a long bench seat. It was, you could pull wheelies without wanting to pull wheelies, but that was the one I remember, and goodness me, I felt I was so cool on that bike.
I do know the type of bike that you're describing there, and it's funny because whenever I hear about that bike, the first thing that comes to my mind are those handlebars, but I didn't realise it had a gear shift in the middle. That would have been quite interesting. I have to ask though, you could pop wheelies without you wanting to, but were you of the adventurous spirit where you were just finding you were going out on a ride to pop out wheelies anyway?
Do you know what? I think it was more as a means of transportation at that age. I don't think I thought of an adventure as being an adventure. We'd want to go to the swimming bath, so we'd walk 6 miles and walk 6 miles back. That kind of thing. And we're not, we're very young teenagers at this age in the holidays. All the time, we had woods out the back of our house, so we had so many things up trees, and honestly, if I told you some of the stories, swinging from ropes with knives. We had this game called Spot that was a dare thing, and you had to just hang on with your toes and your feet. I was just, I think cringe now, and kids would not be allowed to do these kind of things now, probably. So looking back, it was probably crazy adventure, but actually, it was just playing. It was just what you did.
Oh, no, definitely. And somehow you managed to survive your childhood and take that spirit of,
exactly,
the outdoors into your adult life as well. Before we get into that, Simon, could you just briefly, if you were to summarise yourself for someone who's never heard of you before, how would you do that?
I have a lovely wife, Liz. I live on the west coast of Scotland. I'm sort of retired. I was a media person, what in modern parlance would be a content provider. I was a TV reporter and producer for many years, and I had a parallel career as a travel writer, hiking, biking. I'd write for any magazines as long as I could take pictures. It wasn't really ever about the money. It was about usually getting commissioned to go somewhere and get a free flight or something. That was why I did it. I retired at 50, started making adventure sport films for a TV show that we have here in Scotland. And I also made a series of sea kayaking films with my good friend Gordon Brown on the Isle of Skye. And they still sell well. I really got into sea kayaking after we did the Pacific Crest Trail, and we wrote a guidebook to the west coast of Scotland. And I always looking for something new to do. I don't know why it is. Although I think they tend to find you rather than that. And now I run a podcast and a YouTube channel called Always Another Adventure. And I do not know how I had time to work.
I love that you were saying, your thirst for adventure and stuff, whilst you fell into a career that sort of coincided with that. It was really a way of you being able to get out there and explore for yourself. That really resonates.
I remember quite clearly a moment, actually, where I was just getting into winter climbing, and I was on Ben Nevis, and I remember thinking, I could sack off this career, because it was fairly early on in my career. I could pass that up, and I wonder if I could make a living in the outdoors, because it was just such a great place to be. But the thing is, I actually loved the job of being a TV reporter. I loved the communicating. I thought it was a great thing, and I felt I was quite good at it. So I took a deliberate decision, probably on that day, that I was going to try to combine them both in one form or another. So I've not done anything that's massive apart from the Pacific Crest Trail that's taken me around the world, or any huge long trips, but I've done loads of little things. Never been good at anything, but fairly good at a heck of a lot of things, which tends to be actually what a reporter ends up being, a little bit about a heck of a lot of things.
The thing that struck me when I was learning about a lot of the different things you did, and actually it's that word, different types of adventures that you've undertaken. It's not that you've had a life that's just been purely about adventuring on two wheels, although you've done some great things on two wheels, but you've mixed that in with your sea kayaking, you've mixed it in with your long distance hiking, the Pacific Crest Trail, which at 4,270 kilometres is quite an impressive distance in itself.
I'm a great believer in these things finding you, though, Bella. I'm not even sure that you choose them. I think they come along and tap you on the shoulder, and when you just don't turn around and look at them, they'll stick. It's a bit like my dog when she wants feeding. She'll stare at you, and they kind of do that, and that's when another door opens. Really, they're all the same, and I'm sure the people who are interested in these things are interested across the board. We're not all just runners. We all do other bits and pieces. And I often find that people who are into the outdoors, we are kind of a breed that is wired in a certain way. And I very rarely find someone who is wired like that who I don't get along with.
It's interesting when you say that. Obviously, I'm a passionate cyclist of all types: road bike, gravel bike, mountain bike, touring, commuting on bike. I love it. I love that form of active travel, but I love the fact that, a bike has taken me to so many places. But I've often said, and specifically here where I live in the Pyrenees, it's where the road ends and the bike stops that the real fun begins, because those hiking trails just take you further up into the magic. And I feel with a lot of what you would have discovered in your adventures would be similar, and the different experiences you would have had sort of, paddling along on your sea kayak along the coast of Scotland would be very different to, biking along the high alpine pass on a military road on the Torino Nice Rally, or to, some of the areas you would have been hiking through on the Pacific Crest Trail as well. The thirst for the outdoors and the passion for the outdoors is what highlights it, but the experiences you have would be so different.
Although at their heart, they carry this seed of self-sufficiency, that you have what you need to travel through a landscape. It's a bit like a glorified snail, I suppose, that you have all you need. It's much easier on a sea kayak than actually having it on your shoulders. It's carrying the weight. Much easier to propel. And the other thing is, maybe I'm a bit too much of a butterfly. Maybe I like doing different things, get bored with stuff after a while, and move on. And I mean, one thing I didn't put on your list, Bella, when we were going to talk about things, and I don't want to complicate it, but I met climbing in a climbing expedition in Alaska when we were doing unclimbed peaks. That was a similar kind of thing as well. And it's that whole panoply of adventure for me. That's why I call the channel Always Another Adventure, because that's the best one is always the next one.
Simon, you touched on this at the start there, where you said, you lived with, woods very close by your house. So you found you were, outside all the time. You weren't an inside child, if that makes sense. You were outdoors. This passion for the outdoors has obviously been ingrained in you from very young. Were your parents, that way minded as well?
They weren't, but I'm not sure that at that time it was a thing. They were both very busy in their respective jobs. My mum ran a series of clothes shops, this is in the 1960s and 70s. My dad, who was in the same business as me, he was a TV producer, and they were flat out in their work. There wasn't quite the leisure time that we enjoy. That's my perception of it. Through school and what have you, I didn't really think of myself as adventurous, but I'm jumping ahead here, but I can remember and it sounds really weird, but I can remember exactly where I was when I thought, my goodness, these mountains look good. And it's bizarre in a way, because I had a job on TV and I'd made a series of films very, very young, too young to be given this responsibility. But I'd managed to somehow blag making a ski film for the ski company Nielsen. And I was the presenter and I was also putting it together. So we'd had a week in the Alps learning to ski. And I was so focused on the skiing and the filming, what have you, I was paying no attention to the mountains. And then within 6 months, I had a job as a TV reporter in the BBC Northeastern Cumbria. Now, that's the north of England. And we covered the Lake District, or the northern part of the Lake District. And I had to do a story which involved me driving back through the A66 between Cockermouth and Keswick, and I was coming down the side of this nice lake there. Skiddaw was on my left, and I looked at these mountains and I thought, wow, this is my patch. I live here now. I could come here every weekend. And that is actually where it took off. It was like, I don't know what I'd been doing when I was a kid, because I hadn't really seen the appeal of the hills and the mountains, and that's what draws me. It was a moment that actually must have changed my life, because if I was to look out the window here, we've got hills all around us. I'm in the hilly west coast of Scotland, and it's shaped the way I've lived my life, and even to this day, where I live now.
Yeah, well, some spectacular hills where you are up on the west coast there as well. I've been fortunate to visit Scotland a couple of times in my travels and experienced the proper Scottish weather of all seasons in all seasons in an hour, yet alone multiple times a day. But I still vividly remember the first time I cast eyes on the Scottish Highlands. And typical, a snow shower had just passed. We were going through Glencoe. We were based just at Fort William that day, but we were taking a drive through on the local roads there through Glencoe. And I remember vividly, because a snow shower had just finished, dumping down. But then that magical moment where, it's blowing a gale, so everything's sideways, but to your eyes that doesn't matter. All of a sudden, this most magical golden light just cast itself over onto these lovely mountains with fresh snow, and I that landscape has really still got a part of my heart. I just absolutely love it. I didn't have the quintessential cliche, all of a sudden a big stag comes out from the side of the road and stands by the car, and but yeah, Scotland, what a place to call home.
Yeah, they feed them at the King's House Hotel.
I just love that part of the world, and it's a great one to be calling your own backyard.
I have a good friend called Bill Barber who says the west coast of Scotland is for people who prefers quality of days to quantity of good days, and it kind of gets that way, because when the weather here is good, it rivals anything I've ever seen anywhere, from the Karakoram to the Cascades.
You would have quite a vast array of places to have a comparison with. But it's great that where you've settled is still filling your heart with joy, if that makes sense. It's great that you look out your window and go, wow, look at these mountains. That's great. Simon, your life has really been filled with so many different travels and so many different, different types of adventures. I wouldn't mind delving into some of them in a bit more detail. And the first one that I've got on my list is one which I guess is more famous now than most likely was when you first set out onto it, and that's the Camino, the Pilgrim Trail.
Yeah, Camino de Santiago.
You cycled the full length of the Pilgrim Trail, didn't you?
Probably not the full length, because I think the theory is your pilgrimage is meant to start from your door, or from a cathedral in your country, or from, as the Bishop of Le Puy did it, and I'm going to say 1170, from Le Puy, in France.
Yes.
But I think most people now, as I did, start in Saint-Jean, in the foothills of the Pyrenees, which is what I did, and that was 1991.
When I say many people know of the Pilgrim Trail, I mean, obviously, the Pilgrim Trail has been made famous through film and cinema now. But when you did it, it's not to say that not a lot of pilgrims were on that trail. It's been around for centuries, after all. But riding and cycling the Pilgrim Trail, was that a popular thing to do? Did you come across a lot of cyclists back then?
I believe in Belgium you could go on the pilgrimage instead of doing community service if you'd committed an offence. I think it was still considered a punishment in certain countries. That's my recollection. I could be wrong about that, and if you're Belgian, please correct me. For me, it was probably one of my first experiences of these things finding you. I'd got a book of Great Walks of Europe, and I'd been flicking through it thinking, oh, that'd be good, that'd be good, that'd be good. I think I did one actually in the Dordogne. It was, with a girlfriend. It turned into an absolute disaster. But that's a different story. And one of them was this Camino. And my dad had always been fascinated in Spain, and they'd retired to live there in the south of Spain, a tourist area. But it wasn't quite so developed at the time, because when they went there, it was the 80s. And I never really got what it was about Spain that really fascinated my dad, but I was very happy for them being out there. And he died about a few years after, it must be the 88, I think it was. And while I was there, the front page of the English language newspaper, the Costa Blanca News, had literally a banner headline above the fold, one word, Santiago. And I thought, hang on, that's the book I've just been reading about Santiago. That's where the pilgrimage goes. There was a whole series of little things like that. You know when you learn a new word and then you hear it 3 times that week? This was one of those examples where something was staring at me and saying, you need to do this. And I thought, well, I wonder if that would be a good thing to do, to find a part of Spain and try and see in it what my late father really saw in it. So I thought, well, I'm not going to walk it, even though I was into walking, because at that time I was enjoying my mountain biking, even though it was still quite new. I think I had my second mountain bike, Gary Fisher, and I thought, well, I wonder how well I could stick to the original route, because there was a walker's route and there was the original route, and there was no English language guidebook. There was an Everest guidebook that was all in Spanish, and it had this weird scale that expanded to when you needed detail. So if you were going through a town, it took up the whole page, and if you had 50 miles to go on a straight line, it would be like an inch big. So it was a really curious guidebook. I've never seen anything like it. And my idea was, if I took a mountain bike, then... Because very often, when the road builders came along and wanted to put their road between two places, they'd look for the easiest or direct way to do it. And very often, that was the route of the original Camino. So I thought, well, in those cases, if you really want to stick to the original Camino, you're going to be walking along the road. So the walker's route doesn't follow the original. It varies off, and they take him up through trees and nice ways. But there are other times in the mountains where the original route is a bit too hard for the guys who are putting down the roads. They don't want to go that way. So I thought, well, with a mountain bike, I'll be able to stick to the original route, and that was what was in my guidebook. So that was my first go at trying to do something of this. I'd never done anything where I'd been away from home, apart from for work, and just living out of my panniers, as was then, Carrymore panniers. And it turned into a cracking adventure. It was 1,000 miles, and there were so few people. In Roncesvalles Monastery, there were 2 other pilgrims, and they said a mass for us. I'm not particularly religious, but it is and I did get a bit over-churched by the time I got to the end of it.
They're always at the top of a hill too.
That's true. Oh gosh, yeah. But they're so weird as well. But you will know now after what is it, The Way, that movie, the Martin Sheen one, after that his son directed. After that, I mean, I've been in the Pyrenees since then, and you're slaloming pilgrims trying to get down. There's so many of them. Whereas I was staying in places where there'd be at most three people. And this was September, cool time of the year. It wasn't for the Saints' Day, which I think is sometime in July. It wasn't for then. But yeah, and a very similar, if we get on to talking it, exactly the same thing happened with the Pacific Crest Trail, because there was a movie came out about that called Wild, and the numbers went from a few hundreds to their thousands. So I think I just had a knack of getting in at the right time.
Yeah, you're a true pioneer getting in there before the masses discover it. I wonder, because what you were saying there with the original route and being able to take a mountain bike to be able to go to these places that, potentially too out there and too gnarly, too challenging for a road. I wonder, is that original route what people cycled now? Because I've had friends who cycled the Camino and they loved it. But a lot of their comments was, it's just along the road. There were a few steeper sections where they were happy they were on mountain bikes, but most of it they found they were actually, and the walkers do, they're walking on the road as well. So I wonder if the route you've taken isn't the route that's used in guidebooks now.
30 years ago, who knows? I mean, anything could have changed. So I don't know. But I remember being on the road quite a lot and was very glad I wasn't attempting to walk the original route. But I also remember I remember actually having to push my bike across the Pyrenees downhill because it was so bloomin' windy, and the pass it was grassy, had this tiny weird little gate in it. It didn't really feel like a long established, a well established path, but yeah, it was some great little places to go to.
If it makes you feel any better, Simon, I had to push my bike down a hill about 2 months ago because of the crosswind here in the Pyrenees, so it's still blowing and raging hard on certain days in certain directions.
Yeah, I imagine it does get quite rough.
So how did you go from, cycling the Camino to, and I imagine this isn't your next adventure, but it's the next one on my list, and that's the Pacific Crest Trail, which I know you quoted in miles, but I still feel that kilometres, 4,270 kilometres, is much more impressive. And that's a monumental hike.
It's actually a hike between two monuments.
It is actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember the moment that I knew I was going to do this. Because, as you know, any good story needs a narrative. It actually has to start somewhere and go somewhere. So I was always looking for a good story. And there was, I want to say 1979 edition of an old copy, probably found at the dentists, of the National Geographic. And my photographic hero, Galen Rowell, had a piece about the John Muir Trail, which is a kind of a long-distance trail, starts in Yosemite and ends on Mount Whitney in the United States. And the photographs are brilliant. And not many people were talking about it at the time. Not that many people were hiking it. They were doing bits of it. And I thought, well, this is something I'm definitely going to do. So I did it in 1998, wrote it up, had pictures for the magazines and all that. But when I was on it, there's a place on there called Vermilion Valley Resort. It's still going, and it's at the end of Lake Edison, but the trail's at the other end of Lake Edison. So there's a boat that comes out twice a day to take you across the lake. And I'm sitting on this boat with my pack thinking I'm a big roughy-tufty hiker. I'm out for 3 weeks, I'm in the backcountry 3 weeks, posting boxes of food to myself and this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there with another guy who's a lot skinnier than me, a lot hairier than me, and I said to him, okay, so where are you going? And he said, I'm doing the Pacific Crest Trail. Yeah? What's that? And he told me he was out for 6 months. And it literally was a hairs on the back of my neck moment. It was like, oh my goodness me. And yeah, that was it. I actually thought, well, that's what I'm going to be doing. And it took me 4 years to get everything lined up for it. But I knew then I was going to do it. It took me 2 years to get to the state where I could do it and approach the BBC to get 6 months unpaid leave, and then tag on my regular 4 weeks leave on top of that, and then do some training hikes. And actually met my girlfriend who decided she wanted to come with me, and we did some training hikes together. We did the GR20 in Corsica when it was a little less restricted than it is now, and we could do a little bit of wild camping, even though we weren't meant to. And the Cirque de Solitude still had all the chains and what have you. And we did another one on the Costa Blanca Mountain Way, which doesn't sound particularly exciting, but was a real exercise in finding water, which is a big thing on the PCT when you're going through deserts and what have you. So as I say, this kind of found me. I didn't pick it. It kind of picked me. I could have turned my back on it, but it was just too good to ignore, really.
I have so many questions about embarking out on a journey that will take literally months.
It's like, where do you begin, isn't it, really?
Totally. And I mean, we could say, where did you begin? I think you began in Mexico. Is that correct?
Well, on the border, on the American side of the border, near a town called Campo. But yeah, it was just putting it all together. I mean, we did some hiking in the States as part of our run up to it. We did part of the Continental Divide Trail, and Liz realized that I can eat anything. So I can have freeze-dried meals, and that'll do me fine. And she also realized she couldn't. She liked good food, so I appointed her head of food. And so she bought the dehydrator. So we had this little rented flat in Glasgow, and for weeks, and actually I'm going to say months beforehand, the windows were open, and this dehydrator's whirring away, sort of drying out tomato sauces and chickpeas and you name it. So we could then package it all up. We had friends who still live in Santa Fe, and we stayed with them for a month beforehand, and we bought lots of food and put it in boxes, and then Heather, God bless her soul, took them when we needed them, about a week or so before we needed them, all labelled up, to the right post office and said, "Can I send this, please?" And she got to know her post people very, very well by she was sending boxes of food to us. People do it in different ways now. But there were, I want to say 270. That's how many people I counted it near there's a get together for people starting this trail. That's long gone now. But we're going to say less than 300. And now the Pacific Crest Trail Association issues around 7,800 permits for the trail in a typical year. And the numbers were growing already, but it's largely been the result, like the Camino, of a book by Cheryl Strayed called Wild, and the subsequent film that I just watched the other night as well. And that's just skyrocketed interest. And at the moment, actually, I'm doing some work trying to find out how the trail has changed over the years.
It would definitely be fascinating. And actually, on that note, you are, and I guess this is the benefit of the type of career path that you chose as well, Simon, because you had, and at the time, you took the decision to actually document or record segments of your trip. And when I say record, I mean you had conversations with people that you met along the way on the trail.
Yeah, well, the technology has changed so much. I mean, 20 years ago to me, it doesn't feel that long. But in technology terms, it's the Stone Age. I was using a film camera, a small one, nice little Ricoh, fit in my top shirt pocket, but still a stills camera. People navigate now with apps that tell them where the food is, where the water is, where to go. And that brings its own problems, because you get overuse areas. Somebody posts something on a site and says, "Look, there's a great camping spot here." He means for one person, 25 show up. There's all kinds of these things. We were using paper maps, and there was no such thing as a blog. The word hadn't been invented. There were trail journals. And I wanted to keep the muscle that involves my working, which is actually how I came to start the YouTube channel. Actually, I wasn't doing any video work, but that's a long way in the future, and I just wanted to keep this going. So my main thing was writing, and there was a thing at the time called a pocket mailer. If you want to go on eBay now and type pocket mailer, you might find one, but it was something the size of, I'm going to say, a Max iPhone, but much, much thicker, and it opened up along its long end like a hinge, and it had a tiny black and white screen and a keyboard that you typed on with your thumbs, or press keyboard. So you could write a trail journal, but there aren't cell phones. So the way it connected was, on the back there was two things that flipped out, and they were audio couplers. If you could remember the very, very early ages of dial-up, where there was these weird things that you put a telephone receiver in, this was like a portable version of that. So when I reached a payphone, I would dial a toll-free number. I'd put one of these little cups against the earpiece and one against the mouthpiece. And when I heard a certain tone, the old dial-up, all that, I pressed this button and all that would happen and it would transmit its information back. So that was a written journal, which I've tidied up since.
It's a little bit further progressed from, hamsters or squirrels working away in the background just to type everything up and send it along. You're not quite on one end of the phone on a
carrier
paper
pigeon,
cup,
tie it to the leg of a carrier pigeon.
But you did document some of this, and you're now actually going through and rediscovering this to answer that question of how has travel changed.
I went down a little rabbit hole there. I do apologise.
No, I love it. It's good.
I had do you remember mini discs? Does anybody remember mini discs?
Of course.
They were.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I put a load of music on a whole bunch of mini discs, and I'd put one in each of our boxes, so we'd have some fresh music each time. And then I got a little microphone that was no bigger than the last knuckle to the end of my thumb. Tiny little thing that just plugged in with a microphone with a 3.5mm jack on it. Plugged it straight in. And I thought, well, let's do some recording. And I might get a radio piece out of it for Radio Scotland. I was working in BBC Scotland at the time. But when I got back, and this was the reason in a way we took up sea kayaking, the last thing we wanted to do was to have anything to do with hiking. So all our hiking stuff went into some boxes and got shoved in the back of our loft when we found a place to live. Shoved into the corner, and these recordings went with it. So we over-recorded over the music as we went. And I completely forgot about them. And we were having a huge clear out in December, and we came across this Ziploc bag that was clearly an American one, because theirs are different, and with all these 11 discs in it. I thought, I've got no idea. I've never played these. They could have a load of machine noise. There could be a load of distortion on them. They may be rubbish. But I should listen to them to see, because I found them now. Maybe there's something in this. But how do you get a mini disc now? On eBay, they seem to be prized possessions. They're about £100 each, and I only needed this for a week to digitize 11 things. And I thought, well, it's a bit expensive to pay for that. But our local high school, I put it on Facebook. Anybody in the area got one? He said, local high school's got one. So they lent me one, digitized the lot, and it was like opening an audio time capsule. Partly our recollections and hearing our voices come from 20 years ago. But the people we spoke to, it was complete. And one of the really experienced hikers, a guy called Ron Strickland, said to us at the time, in decades to come, this year, 2002, will be looked on as the classic time to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, because the tread is good, the blazes are on the trees, there's an infrastructure of trail angels, the people who put water in the desert and welcome us into their homes, and it's not too crowded. So I'm injured, I'm off the bike at the moment, so I've spent the last few weeks putting this together into a podcast, which I'm going to put together on the 1st of April. It might be live by the time you hear this. If you want to find out about it, it's called PC. Go to pctpodcast.com. Everything's there. And and I'm doing a few more interviews to find out how it's changed, because I imagine it could have changed for the better as well. The increased numbers will have increased awareness of the fragility of an important trail.
I think it will have also birthed its own extra little bit of tourism industry too. You can't have that increase in numbers without infrastructure sort of type. And I'm talking about in the towns that the trail would pass through. Just the amount of extra food, for example, needed just to feed people, places to refuel, to stay. So I imagine it had birthed its own little mini industry along with it too. And it would be interesting to see, there'll be great points to that. There might be some down points to that too. But I find it fascinating that you have been able to, unwittingly, in a way, Simon, this was your original podcast and you're rediscovering it now. You're just a pioneering podcaster back in the day.
I'd love to say that was planned. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? Like comparative journalism. That would be very well planned. But yeah, I'd love to.
I was going to say again to your other point, these things find you. So, life has planned it for you in advance.
Absolutely.
Hi everyone, it's Bella here.
Just wanted to say, if you're enjoying what you're listening to so far and liking the podcast, could you please go into your podcast player app and give it a rating and a review? It really helps the podcast to grow and reach a wider audience. Thank you so much. Now, back to the show. So you mentioned there, I feel like I've scrubbed along, but there's so many adventures to dig into here. You sort of hinted that by the time you finished it, you were well and done through with hiking. So were you just hiked out? 6 months of hiking makes you not want to hike anymore?
Absolutely. Do you know what? I've been looking back, and I wrote a piece for the magazine, The Great Outdoors, and we were actually sending them monthly updates, which you can do on a trail this long. And I wrote a piece saying, this has become a job. It's a great job, but it's a job. The job was 10 by 10. We have to get 10 miles in the can by 10 o'clock. And we were doing well over 20 miles a day. Every day, and if you average 2 miles an hour, considering, because you're going uphill, you're going downhill on some things, you've got mountain passes, you've got deep snow, 20 miles, that's 10 hours a day. That's quite a punishing schedule to be keeping. So yeah, by the time we got done, we'd met a lot of really, really nice people. The people were the best thing by far, and usually are on these things. We'd met a load of nice people, and some of them said, yeah, come and stay with us in Seattle. And they were kayakers. And they said, do you fancy going out for a paddle? It was like, yeah, that sounds good. And we did, and that was when we kind of thought, I quite like this. And almost as soon as we got home, we signed up for a sea kayaking course, and one thing led to another. We hit it off with a guy who became a friend, who then became the guy who coached us. And when my work was getting a bit calmer with the BBC and I was heading freelance, he said, well, why don't we make some films and some coaching films? And we came up with a rather innovative way of doing it. And yeah, it amazes me they are still selling. Ones from 2006 are still selling. Not as DVDs as they originally were. They're selling as downloads now.
It's interesting, actually, Simon, because when you think of it, sea kayaking is just so vastly different to hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. Like you don't have...
you see, no, it's not. It's a different landscape. You're moving through a different landscape. In this case, a seascape, because it's when you're on land, you're reaching places very few people get to, and it's exactly the same as being in a wilderness trail. You're spending time out there, either in your own company or with people you like. You're sleeping very often under the stars. You're moving at a human pace. You're not seeing the world through a windscreen. And it's that connection with the land. It's just so, instead of seeing, I don't know, mountain lion and bear being the things you want to watch out for, here it's seals and minke whales and dolphins and otters, which are far safer to actually see, I have to say. So I see them as very, very similar.
I guess similar in that you're immersing yourself in an outdoor environment.
Although trying not to immerse too much when it comes to sea kayak.
Bad choice of words on my part. I actually, when I was still in Australia, I worked with a couple of gentlemen in different places, but they both were avid paddlers. They loved their kayaking. And where I lived in Australia, in Canberra, there was a Lake Burley Griffin, and they used to kayak out there in the mornings. And sometimes they would, on weekends, travel 2 hours away to kayak on the open water there on the south coast of New South Wales. But they both had an ultimate goal, and I must go back and see if they ever did this, of actually sea kayaking the length of Bass Strait and doing it from the bottom of it, leaving from Melbourne and pulling into Devonport in Tasmania. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, I have. In fact, the very first podcast I started doing, which was in 2006, was called Sea Kayak Podcasts, and one of the people I spoke to had kayaked the Bass Strait. So it is a known thing to do. I'm not in that world now, so I don't really know the people as well as I did. But yeah, and incidentally, Sea Kayak Podcast, it's still out there on Apple. Amazes me the long legs, the length of time that podcasts can stay live.
Because I was going to say, with the Bass Strait, being an Australian, we know very well the danger of the waters and the types of weather systems that can go through the Bass Strait there. But it fascinated me that A, it was even a route, but B, that there's there's islands that you need to get to on certain, to get through that rate. It's just a total different world that, unless you're in it, you don't know it exists, if that makes sense. It's like a lot of things in life. We live in a bubble and then we get exposed to something that piques our interest. Someone tells you about the Pacific Crest Trail and all of a sudden you spend 4 years making sure that you get to the start to it yourself,
new world.
Isn't it? Wow.
And actually for that, it's the gear. A whole new thing about these ultralight. I mean, this is days of ultralight, and people are making their own packs. They're making their own shelters. You don't use a tent. You have this weird little tarp thing and use Tyvek as your ground sheet. And your stove is a 2 bits of a Coke can stuck together with a hole stuck in it. It's all this kind of weird cultural, and they all have them, and that's something I really like, and want to find out about and want to share. Actually, I think that's probably the ultimate thing, is I do quite like sharing these adventures.
So I must have skipped through so many of your adventures, but let's skip ahead to one of your most recent ones, which was the Torino Nice Rally. For those of my listeners that aren't aware of it, can you just give a rundown of what the Torino Nice Rally entails?
Well, let me just tell you that this was another one that found me. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about the Torino Nice, and I'd signed up for. I was going to do one in Scotland called the Rome Scotland Rally, but I got sick, and I said to my friend who lives in France, I said to him, "Have you seen this? Do you fancy coming over to do this?" And he said, "Oh, I've just been reading about that. Apparently it's based on the Torino Nice Rally." "Oh, what's that?" So he told me all about the Torino Nice Rally. And the more I found out about it, and then things just kept cropping up. And I think nowadays you can probably blame some algorithm for that, because the moment you put it into a search engine, then Facebook starts showing you stuff, Instagram starts showing you stuff. So perhaps that sort of synchronicity is more mechanical nowadays. But anyway, it is absolutely, what it's not is a race. It is there's actually, I think it's called a reliability ride, is its technical term. And it starts in Turin in September, and the route that James Olsen and his friends pioneered, they just kind of stumbled across it. They had a bunch of old-fashioned maps when they were out there, and they were just trying to piece together a route. But they're essentially 4 high military roads blasted through the Alps by the Italian military over the centuries. Generations of armies have gone along these in various degrees of equipment. And they are interspersed, because they are not all linked, you intersperse them with some classic road culls. And all the way along there are choices to be made. Do you... there's not one set route. Do you want to take that route that involves carrying a bike for a little bit and will take longer, or do you want to take this route? That kind of thing. But when you are up there, above 2,000 meters, it's massive. Oh, the mountains around you are so beautiful. If you've got good weather, the skies are blue that you cannot imagine. The rock is this broken, bright grey granite, and the gravel cycling is absolutely special. The mountain huts are good as well. Oh, it really caught my imagination. Now, what I didn't know at the time was that vehicles are allowed on these wonderful roads too. So that came as a bit of a shock. When you're looking at all the pictures, nobody takes a picture showing the travel cues. The fact you've got motorbikes coming past you and German four-wheel drive vehicles. And there was a whole German rally came through when I was on it. So that was less good, but it didn't detract from the very special feeling of riding from Turin up into the mountains, through connecting these roads together, and then coming back out at the other end into Nice. I think it was Lael Wilcox who gave it the description of being one of the best bikepacking routes in the world. And she's organised two now, women's Torino Nice rallies, and yeah, it is a special route.
And actually, something that struck me when I was reading your blog about it, Simon, was that you decided to undertake the route and you would take 10 days to ride the route. And something that you intimated in there behind the reasoning was nobody ever gets back from these holidays wishing they had done it quicker. They always want to stay for longer if possible.
Yeah.
Because you also filmed filmed sections of the Torino Nice, of your ride along that route, to post up as an information series on your YouTube channel as well. I wanted to ask sort of 2 questions there. One, was 10 days slow enough?
I guess it was for me. Suppose I could have taken longer, but then when you're in the valleys, yeah, yeah. No, I think it was. It felt for me the right time. I knew I would be going slow. I mean, some people did it in 5 days, and and great if you're strong and fit enough to be able to do that. But I don't know. There's an awful lot of people seem to do this multiple times. They go back, and because there are so many choices, they'll go a different way, and that's a nice side of it. 10 days was right for me. I wouldn't go back having done it in 10 days, but I'm sure if I'd done it any faster, I would want to go back and savor it.
And I guess my other question is, because you do, document your travel, and specifically for this one, you're stopping to video yourself riding a section of road, you're talking to camera and whatnot. Do you feel that because you are going to the lengths of actually producing video and actually showing films of this sort of trail, do you feel that enhances your experience, or is an extra, I don't want to say burden, because you don't do it as a burden, you do it because you enjoy doing it, but is it an extra thing that you need to consider? And I guess to give you a bit of background to that question,
I know, I guess what you mean.
yeah, what I was going to say is more background to that. So my passion is photography. I always joke, I'm not sure whether I'm a cyclist who takes photos or a photographer who rides a bike to take photos, if that makes sense. And I often find a lot of my rides, the motivation to do them will be because I know a specific place that I want to go and see what it's like in today's weather, in today's landscape, with whatnot that's going on. And I wonder, with your passion for film and documenting and videoing things, whether that means that you're looking at the trail in a different set of eyes than perhaps your normal trail user?
Okay, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I've really thought about this, so I'm gonna have to sort of shape my answer while I'm thinking. I think I probably don't make as many friends with people because it's an imposition, I think. I mean, you don't want to be pulling out a blooming camera and oh, this conversation's going really well, let's put it on video. So you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be, certainly don't want to be that person. Okay, going back one step, I find making the videos to be incredibly motivating because it gets me out and makes me do stuff, and actually it makes me look for new stories, which usually involves a new route to want to go and ride somewhere. It was exactly the same as when I was writing hiking stuff for magazines, long distance hiking stuff. I'm doing 3 days through the Cairngorms. I'd want a story for it. So it motivates me to do things, and I think that's particularly healthy as I'm getting older. It's also a coping strategy because there are times that, when stuff happens that it's not going well, you can almost step out of it and go, right, well, I wonder how I'm going to get out of this. Because adventure does happen when things start going wrong. You can have the best spreadsheet in the world, but, the moment your bottom bracket goes, it's out the window. Nothing you've booked's gonna hold together. And that that's happened so many times on, and I do think, right, I wonder what's going to happen here. So I like it from that point of view. I obviously enjoy the act of sharing it, and somebody once said to me, is that not incredibly conceited? And I suppose, in a way, it is, to think that people would want to watch this. But if they do, then that's good, and I enjoy making it. If they enjoy watching it, good, and if they don't, fine. So, do I miss out on anything? The good thing is when I'm doing it with Liz hates it. She actually really does not like being in it. She's a great anchor for me in that respect, in the sense that she holds me back as well from going too far and from doing too much. But, there's not a control. There's not another me having exactly the same experience without making the film, so I don't know exactly how different it would be. I think on balance I enjoy doing it, but I really do hope I know when not to and when just to enjoy the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it's the perfect excuse to have a break when you're going up a hill. I've got to stop and have a look at this view for just a little bit longer.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Or when you're riding with other people. This used to happen to me because I was out with a whole bunch of guys when I was taking pictures. There was one in particular I'm thinking of, and they were all so much fitter than me. But you'd go, "Oh, great view here, guys," and they'd be miles ahead. "Sorry, can you just stop? Can you come back? Great shot." All that kind of stuff. Let them get a breather and catch up. Absolutely.
Oh, it is one of those things, although I'm changing my mindset from that point of view. So obviously I love the mountains. That's why I've chosen to live where I do in the Pyrenees. But it's taken me a while to get to the point where my goal when I first started riding these type of climbs was to not have to stop along the way. The first year it was that 2013 year I did have to stop. I didn't, and I look back on that 2013 version of myself and wonder how I actually did get to the top, because my cycling then to now is vastly different. But then it became, can I get to the top without stopping? And then it became, can I get faster? And I now have to have that, purposeful mindset switch to say that it's okay to stop for me to take in something as a photographer in me, to say, oh wow, the light on there is amazing, I'm stopping now. And I still battle with that internally sometimes. Oh, but I'm doing really well. If I stop now, that's not a good time. But then I love looking back on my photos and going, and because they trigger memories for me. So I was thinking with your videos, where you stop to show things, you're looking at it with that sort of creator's eye, but invariably you're most likely having footage and photos and memories now of some of the most picturesque parts of the trail, or some of the trail that's potentially the most challenging, which will trigger the most memories for you as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing, of course, is because it's video, and very often you don't want to just see another still picture of some video. Usually I just put myself in the shot. So I end up riding the same bit twice. So I ride up to the place, put the camera, ride back down the hill, and then ride back up past the camera. So, and that every shot you see that's got me in it, I've ridden twice.
Yeah, see, Simon, that's why you took 10 days, not 5.
Well, no, absolutely. You're absolute. And it's also why I started. Well, it's not actually why I started a day early. I messed up my dates. But why I did start a day early and was happy to start a day early, because I knew the first couple of days would be a bit ho-hum, and I wanted the rest, the most people, to catch up to me when I was in some great scenery, and that's how it worked out.
Speaking of the scenery, something that really struck a chord with myself personally was, and you intimated this earlier, was that how much that being up there at that level of altitude and experience the landscape that happens above 2,000 meters in the Alps, how much that had an impact on you, and positively, just how much you were in your absolute flow state cycling at that altitude and being immersed in the mountains in that experience.
I think that comes over in some of the videos. There's some bits on there where I'm just like, look at this, just look at this. Look at this. And it's the sort of thing that that when you're, I mean, this is why you hike with someone, or where we tend to pair up with someone, is that we can share those moments with them and go, look at that, isn't that amazing? And you're kind of that support. So when I'm riding by myself, I'm doing that with a camera, and hopefully my joy comes across. I've actually put all those, because I did them as a series of shorter length videos, I've put them together now as a one piece. I've offered it to Komoot because they sponsor the rally, to see if they want to do anything with it. I don't know if they're going to or not, but by the time this goes out, it's probably going to be live on my YouTube channel. It's 40 minutes and it's the whole thing. And if anybody wants to see rather than just hear me blabbing on about what the Torino Nice Rally and experience it, hopefully I've done a fair job of it. Yeah.
As someone who's definitely watched all of your videos on it, and the Torino Nice Rally is something personally for me that I definitely want to do. I have to get over my fear of descending gravel or tricky descents, if that makes sense. That's a personal challenge for me.
Yeah, I don't recall any of it being that. But there again, I avoided one of the trickier descents by doing the even trickier descent, but that was technically not. That was the death road, as it's known, which really is. I think it's now you're really not meant to ride that, which is the closed road that's being bombarded from above by and just literally falling apart. And some people were fined for going down there.
Wow, it's very aptly named. And being in an environment like that, you do realise the landscape is forever changing at that height as well. Like, and not because of humans carving a path. Like perhaps, that road was... I'm not sure... I mean, they're military roads, so I'm guessing they go back to wartime?
I think they go back probably... I'm gonna say to the late 1800s. I don't know for sure. But I mean, the Via del Sale was... which is the one where we have to pay €1 to go down. That's much older than that. It was reinforced by the military, but that was a way to bring. It's called the Salt Way, to bring salt up from the coast into the mountains. So that was well known as a route. And when you look quite closely at it, there are almost like curbstones and little bollardy things that look like they're not barriers. They're not going to do any good nowadays. But it has been used a long time. I think it's probably changed quite a bit around the turn of the century and before the First War. I suspect that was when the Alpine regiments were formed and Austria and Italy were tearing lumps out of each other. And I couldn't say for sure.
To me, it's always fascinating to think about the history of the place when you're there as well. Like, you sort of go back and think, wow, this road, literally translated, the Salt Road was built to as a route to transport salt into the mountains. But then to think of what went into building the road and how many people have travelled this route, and I'm always fascinated by those sort of things. Similar to the Camino route, this was built centuries ago for people on their pilgrim's journey.
Yeah.
And, here you are. The Pacific Crest Trail, how much has it changed since the 30 or 20 years since you've done it? It's quite interesting to sort of think of now, but do you find yourself thinking these sort of thoughts during your adventures as well?
Yeah, to a certain extent. To a certain extent, you think of the history, but you don't necessarily want to be pulling out your phone and finding Wikipedia on the Salt Road while you're in it. I'm just sitting there, just enjoying the moment, actually, to be perfectly honest, and thinking, wow, this is just such good cycling. And the best thing is when you get up fairly early from there are a few mountain refuges along the way, and the mornings from like the Don Barbera hut or the one before the Casa Asieta, they are just, it's before anybody's around. There's none of the vehicles, because they don't tend to stay up high. There's none of them around, and you're just in this wonderful... It's the whole of the Alps is there. Man is present. Whether you've got ski resorts, the hydros, everything in there. You're not gonna move man from there. But still, it looks utterly spectacular, and the big mountains that are around you it's just wonderful to be so close to them and see them from a perspective. They're not just these pinnacles in the distance. They're there. They're right next to you, and even if you're not on top of them, they kind of like they're good to have as guardians almost watching over you.
To me, it's the type of scenery that gets into my soul. But something that you mentioned there always resonates with me, especially traveling. No matter where I am, it's that first thing in the morning. It's almost like it's a gift that not many people are aware of, and what I mean by that is whenever I'm somewhere that other people will most likely be traveling, getting up there early in the morning, seeing that first sunrise, or even just early hours, a lot of people are still not up and at it in the day, and you've just got this special... It almost feels like you've got this special place all to yourself sometimes. I could only imagine what that would be like up in that scenery.
And doesn't that happen?
Yeah.
Doesn't that happen more often on your longer journeys?
Most certainly.
Because you want to get going.
When you're camping, it often happens because you're generally up with the sun, if that makes sense. But you also generally go to sleep a lot earlier camping as well, I find.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Although that one in Casa Asieta, if you are going to use... If anybody's thinking of doing the TNR, if you're thinking of doing the TNR, the mountain huts are absolutely brilliant, but really sleeping in them is not the best idea because of the snoring. It is, oh gosh, somebody was running a chainsaw in our dormitory, I'm sure, rather than snoring. So much so, I grabbed my sleeping bag and found somewhere else to lie down. It was impossible to sleep. So in the second one, I had a little tent with me, and I just put the tent up outside and ate in the hut and got the convivial communal experience, then went outside and slept sound.
And I guess you had the weather where that wasn't an issue either. Pack your earplugs otherwise.
Well, yeah, but you know what? I was ready for bad weather. I think you have to be when you go to the Alps. If you watch those videos, you see I had mud guards on my bike. A lot of people didn't, but I think that you need them because if it's wet, that sort of grey, sort of powdery stuff around the rocks, that just can turn into slush and stick to you. Oh, it can be absolutely horrible. So yeah, I had a good tent, I had a good sleeping bag, and all the kits listed in somewhere in the blogs or in the videos. And I think it's worth being ready for what nature can throw over you, because nature does its best work in out of the way places, but it can also do it can also be quite cruel and get the weather wrong if you get your equipment wrong rather than the weather wrong.
Definitely. And it's one of those things, setting yourself up to be comfortable is the right approach for these type of things, because as soon as there can be discomfort with types of physical adventure just through the physical act, but discomfort because your clothes are soaked through and it's really cold because you're so high up, it can be soul destroying very rapidly, and that can derail your adventure. It'll probably bring out the tales that you'll tell more, for longer. But yeah.
Yeah. But you said they're setting yourself up to be comfortable. I'm not so sure about setting yourself up to be too comfortable, because it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's comfort during the day against comfort at night, because you want to go as light as you can. And we had 6 months of this. You want to go as light as you can during the day, but you need enough to survive at night, to be comfortable-ish at night, but not too much. And that's always the balance, and will always be a very personal decision as to what you can put up with.
Whether you'd rather suffer with an extra kilo of gear during the day, or are you happy to perhaps be a little
Absolutely.
bit colder? or not have a way to make coffee in the morning. Coffee is always coming with me on these adventures.
Have a good weather app on your phone so you know if it's going to belt down. You pull up the booking app, booking.com, and get a room.
Simon, I mean, we mentioned there that, the Torino Nice Rally is, it's piecing together these old military roads, but you do have choices in terms of the route that you can take. And some of the choices you made, one of them was specifically to take on some of the famous Tour de France road climbs that you were aware of from watching the tour. Was it the Izoard that you ended up, the Col d'Izoard that you ended up cycling up?
Yeah, that was it.
It's not right to phrase it, do you regret that decision? Because I don't think you could, because you're seeking out a bit of history that means something special to you for some other reason. But what was it like swapping a military road for the asphalt to be in that terrain?
Well, there's quite a lot of road anyway, and some people were surprised actually by how much road there is on this. So that's a choice. My decision was based on the alternative. And actually, yeah, I do. I think I said this in one of the films. I think I do regret not going the other way to a certain extent, although doing the Izoard let me do other things. So everything has a knock-on effect. Everybody starts on the Izoard, but there's a village, I can't remember its name, where you either peel off and do the Izoard and then down to the valley, or you go over something called the Col de Pique. You won't have heard of this because the road ends in a village where there is a mountain hut, but it was full. I couldn't get in there. And after that, I believe, and I don't know because I haven't done it, but I believe there's a carry involved, and that is with a full bike, and then quite a lot of off-road riding, but not. I'm not sure. It just didn't sound like I fancied taking that on at that point in the ride on that day and at that time of day. So I made the decision, well, actually, in fact, really, right from the word go, when I'd been planning it, I thought, Izoard, it's one of the cols I haven't done. I quite like that. So it was a fairly easy choice for me. But the more I find out about the Col de Pique, the more I think, yeah, if I was going to do it again, I would definitely do that. But what it let me do, because I can't remember the way the days go, it put me in such a position for the day after that to get over the Col d'Agnel at a certain time, and that put me in a great position to eventually be able to get to a hut, the Casa Asaeta, that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to get to in the time that I wanted to, because I couldn't make this last 11 days because I'd have missed my flight. So you're juggling these things all the time, and it goes along with the theory that everything always works out right in the end, and as long as you're happy with your choice, that's fine. I might have. It's not that I would do it differently. It's that next time I might do it differently.
And you say next time you might, because from what I gathered, you're not someone who goes back to do the same thing again. So if you were doing it, you'd have to do it differently.
I think I suppose what's hidden behind that is I would maybe wonder if in a similar situation I might do it differently. Because I usually try and look at things, without getting too philosophical. My dad used to have a thing up in his office that was words to the effect of, I should hate old grey and gnarled, to lie upon my beaten bed and stare at an ever-increasing crack in the ceiling above my head. And as I cried silently into the pillow, I wish I had. And I never want to look back on anything and think, yeah, I really wish I'd done that. And I don't feel that about the Col de Pice and Izoard. In the great scheme of things, it's nothing. But I would have felt that, I think, about the PCT. I might have felt that actually about doing the TNR. So that helps with my decision making. So yeah, if I perhaps would interrogate the question a little more forcefully next time if I'm faced with a choice similar to the Izoard and Col de Pice.
It's a very good saying to have instilled in your mind.
Well, it also means if you flip it around, it means you shouldn't, in theory, have any regrets about anything, which is also I suppose it's a really kind of, I don't know, what kind of approach that would take. What a psychiatrist would make of that. But if you feel you've made the right decision at the time, then that's the best you can do. Simon,
like we have said all along, you've had a life filled with adventure, and you still adventure now.
Hang on, Bella, it's not over yet. You're making
no. You're still very much on this adventure train. What are some of the next adventures that you've got on your horizon there? What are you scoping out next?
There's a few actually. I'm trying to find out, and I asked you about this. I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. That France's first long distance mountain bike route. There's a tour of Massif Central. And there's something about that appeals. It was suggested by the same friend who told me about the TNR, so that kind of appeals. There's the Rome-Scotland Rally that I'm signed up to do this year that I never got to do the other year because I was sick. That's based on the TNR. So, and I've had another idea. Well, I've had another idea to create something, but I'm keeping that under my hat actually at the moment because
watch this space.
It's yeah. I shouldn't have said that actually. I do beg your pardon. I don't like being a tease.
Simon, if anyone's going to create a route that's going to be amazing for cyclists, with your CV of adventuring, I feel you've got the right skill set to put a great route together. I'm definitely going to be watching this space. So on that point of watching this space, how can people keep track of you? How can people follow along and see and read about a lot of the things that we've been discussing about you today?
Oh, just type always another adventure into whatever. Whether it's your Twitter, or actually I don't do much on Twitter, into Instagram, Facebook, or ideally YouTube, or even a web browser, and you'll find alwaysanother.adventure.com, and everything's linked from there. I've enjoyed this, Bella. This is my first interview. It's been quite good. I've enjoyed it.
No, that's great. And for our listeners, I will put links to Simon's socials and adventures in our listener notes as well. Now, Simon, the interview is not over yet. I have two very important questions that, as you probably know, I do ask my guests. The first one is, you have the choice to make between riding your bike on a constant uphill or cycling into a perpetual headwind. Which one will you choose?
Oh, uphill every time, because there's hopefully going to be something to look at the top. What's on the other side? That's the next adventure.
I love it. Actually, no one's ever given that as the reason to going uphill. But I love it. And that's the videographer and photographer in you as well, isn't it, coming out? I've got a vista that I need to take in.
Yeah, but it's also the journalist going, I wonder what's over there.
An inquisitive
Where
mind.
does this go? What happens behind here?
Very good. And the last one, and I have a hunch of what you'll say to this, but it'll be interesting to see if my hunch is correct. If you have the choice to cycle 4 hours and you can cycle with other people or cycle on your own, which one are you choosing?
It's actually quite hard, actually. I would cycle by myself because I tend to cycle mostly by myself. It's what I'm used to doing. Yeah, it would be by myself.
Very interesting. Well, Simon Willis, it has been an absolute pleasure to swap the roles on this interview around and interview yourself and learn more about your adventures. I seriously feel like I wish I could be sat with you next to a campfire and just hear stories through the night. It would definitely inspire me. Thank you so much.
Bella, that's been wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. I've really actually enjoyed it. A lot more than I thought I was going to.
If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review. It really helps the podcast to grow and reach a wider audience. Also, feel free to share it with others and post about it on your social media. Lastly, do you have your own story you'd like to share with us? Then please get in touch by sending an email to podcast@seektravelride.com and request to be featured as a guest on the show. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.